you're starting out and you're making a film on Unreal, do not use...
What's up? My name is Josh Toonen, and for the last 8 years I've worked as a visual effects artist and supervisor.
The Dune shots that you recreated in Unreal Engine.
I didn't know if I could do it in 24 hours, but I'm pretty sure if I cut this corner and we'll just see what happens.
You jumped in the deep end there.
And that's the VFX way. Okay, how do we do this? Wait, what do I do now? Like, this was everything. But I got into visual effects because I want to make my own films. And I wanted to make my own films look just like my favorite Hollywood movies. Okay, yeah, like, what can we make? If you adapt the Unreal pipeline and sprinkle on a couple of these old school visual effects tricks, it can look almost identical, and you can do it 10 times faster.
Can we do it here, right now?
Wait, could I do this sequence today? Filmmaking, it's not a 1 year and you're done type of path. You got to get comfortable before you get creative. How can you do everything inside Unreal? Your workflow is either all real time or it's not real time.
Josh, welcome to the VFX process. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Yeah, I'm Josh Toonen. I've been a feature film visual effects artist and supervisor for the last 8 or 9 years, and more recently started using Unreal Engine on set for the virtual production of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Star Trek Discovery, shows like that, and doing Unreal training on unrealforvfx.com.
And yeah, you've gone for the green background today.
I've been doing like this Godzilla project the last couple days, and it fits the theme, so.
Perfect.
We basically put together like a minute-long previs, and the whole thing was just to kind of do an exercise of like, can you actually pull off like that style of shot out of Unreal? Because I think a lot of people use Unreal for films, but there's not like 80 out there. Most people probably know 2 or 3. They probably know like Irradiation, maybe.
Irradiation, yeah. We actually had Sava, the director of that, on an episode a few months ago. Yeah, what an amazing project.
Yeah, it looks awesome. It's a cool story. It like works for like that medium of Unreal as a filmmaking tool. That's always the one I point people to, because it's like, if you've never seen this before, watch this and you'll start to understand why this is so cool. And just from like purely a filmmaking standpoint, like throw views out of the window, it's like might be the best one out there from a story perspective.
How long have you been using Unreal Engine for?
So it's probably been 2 or maybe 2.5 years since I started using Unreal. I had dabbled very loosely before Unreal 5, but as soon as the promo came out for Unreal 5 and it was real-time lighting and real-time, or basically no geometry limits, after I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm going to take this seriously now. And so I started putting some projects together, and then I was sort of at the right place, right time before Avatar: The Last Airbender was coming out. So the team at Pixamundo reached out to me because we had some mutual friends in the past and things like that. And they're like, hey, do you know Unreal? I was like, yeah, I know Unreal. I've been using it for a super long time. Of course. Just like quit everything and like no light. It was like, okay, I got to learn Unreal for real this time and make sure, because especially on set, everyone is staring at you every time one tiny thing goes wrong. It's like, you got to be prepared, you got to be ready, you got to be fast. So
you jumped in the deep end there, Josh, with that. But a lot of people do, don't they? They say, you know, can you do this? And maybe we don't know how, but give us a little bit of time and we can do it.
And that's the VFX way, I think, is like, okay, how do we do this?
So you were straight on set there doing like VP in camera VFX. Was it virtual production?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was on set. I was an Unreal operator for episodes 3 through 8 because my background is in feature film compositing. I kind of looked at it as being a live compositor. So really being able to make creative changes for the background there on the fly. Instead of having all that time like you do in post, you have 1 day for 1 sequence, and they don't stop the camera to like let you catch up. So you gotta just be like on top of it every single minute.
You gotta definitely think on your feet and be quick, like you say. Like there's no time, really.
It's a brand new pace, but I ended up liking it quite a bit. I definitely prefer that, where every minute I have no idea what I'm going to do next.
So obviously you're working in the industry, you've worked on Covenant, you've worked on Spiderverse, you've worked on Star Wars. So you put your toe into the kind of real time, but then did you take the tools and the knowledge that you took and prepared for on that project to kind of, I want to make my own stuff? Is that how it transitioned, or were you making your own stuff before that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think, honestly, like my entire career was founded on the idea that one day I am going to work on Star Wars like everyone else. It was obviously so cool. We got to do some shots with like the Millennium Falcon and bigger shots than I ever thought I would ever do in my entire career, to be honest. But then after that, it was definitely like wait, what do I do now? Like this was everything. And then now I had nothing else left to really go towards. But I got into visual effects because I want to make my own films, and I wanted to make my own films look just like my favorite Hollywood movies. I'm not checking out of visual effects, but it's just not really the thing I'm focused on anymore. And so it was actually after Godzilla versus Kong, that project wrapped 2020 in May, and there was like mass layoffs at the studio, like many others. And I literally found myself back at home in Wisconsin. I didn't have a place to stay. I didn't want to stay with my parents. So I found this house that my buddy owned. He had like 2 months left on the lease. And that's when I started to write a short film that's up on my channel now, which is called Stay. It's an original short film based on The Last of Us. And that was literally based on like, okay, I have an abandoned house. It has a backyard. It has a driveway. Okay, that's something. I have like these old zombie costumes from back in high school when I made a bunch of zombie films. And so I was just like cataloging all the stuff I had. And then I was also thinking, okay, how do I make something that's both a music video and a short film? So if you kind of rewatch that film from that perspective, it kind of like, oh yeah, it starts with a music video, it transitions into an action scene. But that was sort of the jump. And then, yeah, I found a really great concept by Santiago Betancourt. It was the inspiration for that shot of the two zombies on the wall at the end of that sequence. I think a lot of people as well, they overestimate like getting a crew together to some degree. So that was like a 40-person crew all said and done, which was definitely more than I thought it would be. But that's just kind of what it takes. And we had a couple different locations, and we had zombies as extras, and then you need makeup for those zombies and all this extra stuff. And we spent like 1 minute per location of final film time. So I would produce it completely differently.
The final result is incredible.
I think it works in its entirety. I'm super grateful that, yeah, it worked for you at least.
Yeah.
It was a super long post-production. There's like 98 visual effects shots that hopefully no one can even tell, because we just like snuck them in and added decay to the backgrounds and replaced some of the clicker faces. Stuff that no one's ever talked about, which I'm kind of glad, because I'm like, okay, it actually worked in visual.
If you don't notice the VFX as much, then you've done a good job.
Yeah, it definitely was a huge learning process. Like, you always think you know everything, and then you get slapped in the face by reality of like, it's hard, nothing's gonna work how you want. And yeah, there's I could tell like 50 more stories of that. I'll leave it there. But honestly, it was my biggest regret from that piece, was like, I just never made the big behind the scenes breakdown. And it's actually funny. The main reason why is when that 2 lease month expired, that was the last day of the shoot. And we like, okay, we got everyone out.
The landlord's outside.
Exactly. Literally, we were like, okay, dude, sweep up, fix the background. Like, don't let them go in the garage. Yeah, very long-winded answer, but that really was the foray into filmmaking in the first place. I didn't really want to be a visual effects supervisor either. Right. The more I had seen that over and over again, I think there is this trap that people just think you need to get the next position. Ultimately, it felt like we got to start at the bottom of another ladder and start climbing that, instead of just living in the visual effects world only. And funny enough, Unreal kind of it does allow a lot of people to do both, where you can still do visual effects, you can still do commercial work and freelance work with Unreal, but then obviously it's the same exact tools to jump into your own films. Especially like yourself, when you're doing more of the previs side of things and you have motion capture suits and you're familiar with characters, it's like, okay, yeah, like what can we make?
It's such a powerful tool set, and Unreal Engine is definitely one to have under your belt. That actually moves us into the Dune shots that you recreated in Unreal Engine.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It's that kind of look what movies are doing and learn from them, what works, what doesn't work. Recreating a shot from a stunning visual spectacle, which is Dune. But I guess we can just start off talking about that project, the reasons for it, and how it all started.
It's interesting to look through the lens of like, what's a good shot, because it's so subjective.
It is.
The number one thing that I've been obsessed with lately that makes a great image is depth, which is why I was so excited to jump into those Dune shots. Is you're getting these gigantic landscapes, and it's the difference between being in this flat room where you're shooting against a white wall where it's just flat, there's no depth, like you can see the end of our scene right there, versus literally seeing all the way to the horizon. And you'll see it in Dune, you'll see it in Avatar, you'll see it in Star Wars. They're trying to do this in every single shot. But yeah, the Dune project itself was, Dune 2 was coming out, and I love the first Dune. Dune 2 was even better, in my opinion. There's so many awesome moments. And but I made it before Dune 2 came out, just as like a celebration of movies. A lot of the things I'm trying to do on my channel is just to show that Unreal isn't just a previs tool. It's not this one thing in a tiny box. It's not just a thing to make game cinematics. And that if you adapt the Unreal pipeline and sprinkle on a couple of these old school visual effects tricks, it can look almost identical. And oftentimes you can do it 5 times, 10 times faster. And you don't need a render farm to render out your sequence, which is the biggest thing. So that was honestly where I was coming from. I was like, okay, can I actually do this? And yeah, I knew that there's a really cool tool called JSplacement, which is a great way to make spaceship greeble or just all this crazy detail on a surface.
Which is one of those tricks for scale as well, isn't it? From the old Star Wars movies themselves.
Yeah, it's like if you want things to look huge, you need the surfaces to look tiny in a way. So yeah, it's such a great, simple technique. That's a great tool out there for it. I didn't know if I could do it in 24 hours, but I was like, I'm pretty sure if I cut this corner and I got the ornithopter model off the internet, that I'm like, I think I can do it, and we'll just see what happens. So yeah, that was really just a race against the clock to see if I could do it and see if I could put my money where my mouth is and say like Unreal actually can make things way faster than old school pipelines. You know, you have to play to the strengths of Unreal if you have a small team. So there's no characters. It's intentional, like that we played to our strengths. We just focused in on the ornithopters. And it wasn't something I did, but it's super interesting in that sequence and from Dune when they go into that planet. The only cutaways during that sequence are inside the cockpit, but it's literally Paul Atreides sitting with like a black background behind him. And by cutting those two together and maybe adding in like a bright sunlight so it starts to feel like the live action and the virtual sequence come together, you can do a lot. And I find in general, it's not the craziest, most ambitious ideas out there. It's really just matching the lighting a lot of times, or just making the lighting interesting in the first place. I've heard some people say with Unreal, like lighting can't save bad assets. And I don't agree with that. I think lighting can save bad assets. Yeah. I think like with lighting, you're basically telling the audience where to look. So just have them look at the stuff that looks good and make everything else dark. It put very simply. That doesn't need to take you 5 years to learn. You just need to start applying lights and trying to think of like, okay, yeah, what's the best spot to show off what works and hide what doesn't a lot of times.
So many times that we've been on projects where it's like, you know what, that texture just looks really bad, or it just doesn't look right. Just relight it and just come up with, you know, an alternative.
Throw on a decal or and another thing too is just adding like smoke elements in the foreground. That's a thing I've been doing all the time in this Godzilla series, is just one foreground smoke element. It's real footage. It has the real motion. Just very quickly with one action, it starts to feel a lot more realistic. I think the game to me now is how do I spend the least amount of time and trick you the most?
Talking about kind of being quick and efficient and just throwing things together. KITBASHING, I mean, previs, from my experience, it's use what you can from the internet assets. For this Dune, not experiment, it's what would you say, like project?
Both work, yeah.
Yeah. Can you just talk us through briefly about setting up the main assets and environment, all the layers that come together to create something that feels more cinematic, you know?
Honestly, the way I start every single environment is by creating something called an asset zoo, which is just a collection of all of the assets that you'll use in an environment. So for this Dune environment, it's the buildings, it's the city greeble, it's the mountains, it's the ornithopter, and there was the city walls, which were also a key component there. Those were the big building blocks, and I want to make sure I build those first before I assemble anything, because then I can make sure that the scale of everything is correct. I can put a human in there and say, okay, how big is the ornithopter? How big is the wall? How big is the mountain? Does it actually look correct? And once you go through that step, which doesn't feel so creative at first, there's part of it if you're making the assets. Sometimes you're assembling or you're downloading assets from KITBASH and from other areas, from QUIXEL, different libraries. The next stage is then incredibly fun because you jump right into the environment creation and you're not stopping to like, oh, I got to UV this thing now. Oh, I got to go back and I got to make modifications to all these assets. So you want to do all of that first, and then when you get into the blockout stage of the environment, you're using the best assets, ideally your final assets if you can, and you're placing them in the scene, feeling out the entire look. And then I always try to set up a camera as early as possible, and ideally if it's an animated short or like a previs or something like this, then I want to have that camera animated as well. I want to see exactly what we're going to see in a final shot from the widest point of view possible, and I want to stick a human somewhere in that scene to verify that this is all correct before we get into lighting and all of that stuff, because scale is the biggest problem in absolute beginner's work. I think it's the biggest sign of someone who's just starting to use 3D softwares, which is totally fine. I made this mistake as well. But the big thing is having that attention to detail of making sure everything is real world scale. And it can be even trickier when it's bigger sci-fi scenes or planets, because like, okay, I mean, how big is a mountain, right?
Yeah,
like,
and there's a lot of more relationships between objects and scenes, and the bigger the scene and the complexity, there's different references. So if you see there's a human there, but there's a door there that it's a little bit shorter, it's like, okay, but then there's the vending machine there. You've really got to match.
Yeah, and that's the thing. At first glance, you might not realize it, but your brain does, and the viewer's brain does too. I like to build the environment first. It's kind of like building the set first, and I always try to compare it to the real life filmmaking process personally, just because it helps me hold on to like what I like and what's fun about it, which is early on, it's like designing the sets and kind of being more of a concept artist and assembling the look of the composition of what these frames are going to be. And then the second stage is the animation and the performances. And with vehicles, the performances are a lot simpler.
You cleverly chose, especially for this project, you chose no characters, which is very smart.
Which is why, like, hey, it's in 24 hours. I'm going to give myself some advantages. So,
absolutely.
But it's, and I would absolutely recommend people cut corners in the right way, especially for your first 1 or 2 projects. You got to get comfortable before you get creative. Otherwise, you're still learning the tools and you're not sure how all this stuff works. And especially at the beginning, like the first 10 projects that you make in Unreal, you're probably not going to show anyone.
Hold on, Josh. Until today, the surprise is you're going to screen share the first 10 projects.
Oh,
no,
I got them somewhere. Actually, it would be fun. Even during the last Godzilla masterclass I did last week, I did share the previs of that, and it feels so gross to show previs. Like, no, guys, it's gonna look so much better. Just trust me. But it's got to start somewhere. So
that's the whole battle of just telling sometimes like different departments in movies. Like, here's the previs, and then some people react well to it, some people just don't get it, and you're constantly saying it's not going to look like this.
Let's just call this a first draft. I got this term from Corridor, where they say CG goggles. Like, you got to put your CG goggles on and kind of like look through the glass and kind of see through what the final result's going to be, because you got to use your imagination a little bit.
They commented on one of your videos, the Corridor crew. Do you know them, or is it just like a random kind of...
Yeah, that was totally random. Ultimately, they're like some of the most passionate people on the internet about visual effects. And when I was growing up, my idols for real, because I grew up on 2008 YouTube and like on YouTube super early, it was Freddie W and Corridor Digital. Like, Corridor and Freddie are the reason I am doing what I'm doing today, because they made it seem incredibly possible early on.
I think my first taste of any kind of VFX or After Effects was the video co-pilot, like the Andrew Kramer early.
100%.
Yeah, which is incredible.
Yeah, he honestly is on the Mount Rushmore, or like he's one of those founding fathers of like this generation, whatever you want to say. And
that humor as well. He had a really like unique way to kind of deliver these tutorials.
He was telling dad jokes before anyone else was on the internet. But honestly, it worked great. It was hilarious.
All right. Let's get down to business.
I sidetracked onto the Corridor stuff where we...
Yeah, we're talking about the Dune project too.
Oh, yeah. What about setting up those vehicles? Similar sort of way with substance, chucking on the textures and grabbing a free asset?
Yeah, a lot of times too, like, I'm not a modeler by trade. I will do it when I need to, but oftentimes you can find something for like $50 that they spent a week or two on. So like getting it for $50 is actually a steal a lot of times. It can seem like a lot if you're dropping $50 to $200 on an asset, but
compared to how long it'd take you to make it,
like, it saves you weeks off of your life. So we found a really good model off of either Turbo Squid or CG Trader. I'm not sure. Those are usually my go-to. ArtStation Marketplace is also super, super solid for low cost but high quality 3D models. Actually, the thing that took the most amount of time, I completely skip over it in the video, but UVing that stupid ornithopter took the longest time, and like there's no interesting footage out of UVing an asset. So yeah, so after that was done, brought into Substance, was able to use some smart materials and pretty quickly assemble all of that together. And then the rig is also really simple in Blender. If you're doing hard surface rigs, a lot of times you'll just select a whole object and make a new vertex group and then just assign that to a single bone. So you can imagine with a wing, just like grab the entire geometry, parent it to one bone that's like at the exact same point as that axis, wherever it would rotate from. And it's as straightforward as it seems. It's then obviously there's always a little bit of back and forth to make sure it works perfectly in Unreal, but honestly it's fairly simple. And if you make it so you're importing the rig into Unreal, then you can add all the animation in sequencer. And that's kind of been the bigger unlock in these last couple weeks and last few months here. Is I'm really trying to experiment in my own work with how can you do everything inside Unreal and not animate things in Blender or Maya and import them. Artists have done that for a very long time. Obviously the process works, but the longer I was at Pixamundo, and they were just really trying to figure out how do we use Unreal in every single facet, like where does it make sense? Let's try it. And if it doesn't work, now we know, but let's try it everywhere. It just became obvious that the more that your workflow is in Unreal Engine, the faster you will finish your project as a bottom line statement. And I've been kind of attaching that to this mindset that I've been repeating in my head, which is your workflow is either all real time or it's not real time. And the whole reason we're using Unreal is real time rendering. I get an instant result. I see the final lighting, the fog, the atmosphere, the animation, everything live in my viewport. Playing back that viewport is faster than playing it back in Nuke or After Effects or anything like that. So all these little things in my pipeline, I was realizing like, okay, I'm wasting time here, I'm wasting time here. And animation is no different. So now I'm just trying to find out what is that absolute best way to make that happen and work with control rigs so that we can animate everything in engine. And that honestly is the biggest thing I'm testing out on the new Godzilla project is how can we animate that entire sequence all without leaving Unreal, basically just applying like a compositing template to the end of it. But it's very much working on the final image in Unreal as much as possible.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like your experience on set, having to work quickly and efficiently, potentially you've kind of thought, I'm going to do that on my own projects. Like, I don't want to have to then spend 3 or 4 hours.
You're 100% right.
Can we do it here right now?
Yeah. Can we do it in 5 minutes? Like that I just want to ask the question, because before I wasn't even asking it, and it would be like, okay, I'm going to make this CG short film, and of course it's going to take 4 months, because that's how long it takes, as opposed to, wait, could I do this sequence today? It does also mean that, and that's why I'm trying to share the workflow as much as possible, it does mean you have to do a little bit more across the board yourself, and people with this workflow, by its nature, are more generalists. So you have to know a little bit of lighting, a little bit of environments, and then a little bit of compositing as well if you want to finish your own shots. So yeah, it's definitely a mix of many workflows, and yeah, I'm trying to be the guinea pig first and foremost to find out what works, what doesn't, and just kind of hopefully leave a roadmap so people can jump right into the workflow.
We spoke about the animation, the environment, the depth, because that's and the scale, which is one of the most important things when building a large environment, especially. Lighting is in Unreal Engine. Is that just a simple HDRI equivalent? You know? Yeah,
usually I'll either use an HDRI or more recently I've been going all in on Ultra Dynamic Sky, which is a plugin.
That is an incredible.
Everyone download it, use it. It's awesome.
Incredible.
It's never failed me. It works for nighttime too. It just is kind of a good catch-all. And yeah, so I usually will start with that. And then if we see a lot of the sky, I will then put in a sky as well. But you can use Ultra Dynamic Sky and an HDRI. Funny enough,
yeah.
So.
And you've got raindrops in there, like basic kind of, you've got all the little extra things in Ultra Dynamic. You've got a bit of storm, you've got a bit of the fog and a bit of rain.
I haven't used the rain tools inside of it, which I should, because I'm doing a raid scene right now. I'll write that down.
Up close, it's kind of like, obviously you can see that it's like little sprite things, but man, it'll save you a lot of time for those wider shots.
And that's the thing too, is rain at scale is very tricky. Just like in Dungeons and Dragons, it was snow at scale, because it's like you need stuff really close to the camera, like, you know, but this close to the camera. And then also, what does it look like a mile away? Like, it kind of turns into a wall. If there's a secret sauce to some of the rain in the Godzilla shots, it's because I literally got one piece of stock footage that's close to camera, one that's medium, and one super far away. And even for the far away one, then it's like duplicating them into like 6 tiles, so it's even bigger. Classic compositing techniques of trying to stretch your elements as far as you can. And that, to me, again, I've just been obsessed with it because it's such an easy thing to apply once you know it. All those things that completely make it feel real and huge, and like there's a real camera lens on the front of the camera versus a camera that can kind of float and go anywhere and do anything. That's why it's CG cameras are very tricky to get right, because you need to forget that you can do anything you want with it, and you need to think of, okay, what would a person be doing in real life?
100%.
What rig would they use? Would it be a Steadicam? Would it be or like on a shoulder rig? Would it be a crane? All these things. And a lot of times, simpler is better.
How is that camera represented in the 3D space, but how is it going to be shot in the real world? Because that's where you're going to get your best, most realistic camera moves and everything about like that. So super important.
If you don't do it how they're doing it, it's going to feel fake. That's what's so brutal about it.
Well, when my wife actually watches a movie with me, because she's not a massive movie buff, maybe it's because I can't help but analyse the films, and I'm sitting there mumbling to myself going, is that mounted to a sound? Oh, okay, so maybe that camera's mounted. Oh, how have they moved that around? She's like, just shut up. Just shut up.
I'm watching here. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We watch some movies here to like them, and we watch some movies to hate them. But
yeah.
We know what it is going into it. One of those weird times, I was back home for Christmas. All my hometown buddies were back, and we're like, dude, let's go see Cats. Like, let's go see Cats. Why not? Let's see what the hell happened with that movie. We went on opening night. It was like the Thursday before it gets released, and no one was there. And I was like, oh my God. So we basically got to just watch it and do Mystery Science Theater and just be rowdy and whatever, like just, you know, have fun with it the whole time. That is a tragic movie.
I never watched it.
I can't recommend it, but there's so much work and artistry that went into it. And it's just, when you have 2,000 visual effects shots, you're never going to win. Like, at some point, it's going to fall apart. Like, that is one of the hardest scopes for a visual effects project, to do dancing cats. You need to just ask, why did it have to be CG?
I don't know if you know the story of removing the CG buttholes.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we need to cover those butts up and then fix the shot.
Sometimes visual effects, it's awesome, and sometimes it's a job. And that's one where someone paid a lot of money for that movie.
And someone lost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Moving on to like secret sources about like lighting. Unreal Engine is kind of, it's got a stigma of looking to video gaming. What are the final bits of icing on the cake to take it from a viewport? And as amazing as they look, still there's a few more layers to go on.
Once I have a CG render, it looks a little synthetic. It looks clean. The edges are sharp. And sometimes you can see like the video game motion blur artifacts a little bit. So that last step to me is always compositing the shot in one word. We're just compositing it. And to me, the two ways I like to explain it as easy as possible. Some of you folks out there will know it, but compositing is just Photoshop for video. So we're trying to add imperfections, grunge, noise, smoke, elements, stock footage, stock images, all the same stuff, but to a sequence instead of a single image. And I think most people would be surprised at how simple my scripts are, my nuke scripts of what I'm adding to my Unreal renders after the fact. But I'm always adding something. So I never just take my raw Unreal render and that's my final image.
Do you do anything in Unreal Engine?
Yeah, I actually disable everything. Yeah, personally. Yeah, I disable everything. So I disable glow and lens flares and stuff like that. But it's because personally, I just know what my bag of tricks is.
Of course, yeah, it makes sense.
For some people, honestly, if you don't want to do a lot of post-processing, I would maybe even include glow as the one thing to add. You can crank your ambient occlusion as well. That sometimes helps in your post-process volume. But the Unreal lens flares, I find almost never work, to be honest. I don't want to be a hater, but it just doesn't.
I'm on the same boat as you, Josh. As soon as I see an Unreal Engine default lens flare, I'm off it.
It just tells, and anyone that recognizes it is like, oh, they didn't turn the lens flares off, which kind of sucks. If anything, sometimes I bring them in at like 0.005, just so there's like random movement happening in the frame. Again, because it's imperfections we're adding, right? So that's just one subtle thing.
Lens dirt, another imperfection I love. Maybe I'm a bit of a sucker for the way the Unreal Engine allows you to kind of catch light on a dirty lens is pretty cool. When used correctly, not overdone.
Yeah, it's always, and less is more with a lot of those things. Yeah, I'm always adding in lens dirt. I'm always adding in lens flare footage. So footage of real lens flares, not synthetic ones. I think that is super important. If you want one specific trick, just find the best lens flare footage you can and then save it. Don't let it go. Remember it and put it on everything. Same is true of lens dirt. If you can find a great real image, I have a couple that I just always go back to. I have this one-click compositing template, which was actually an answer to this problem of I'm spending so much time in Nuke, like with War of Being, which was the samurai sword fight we created for this band Tesseract. They had this music video. We had a couple animators on the show as well, but it was myself and animators doing the motion capture cleanup inside of Unreal Engine, like baking everything to a control rig and then reorienting everything. So I would like clean up the mocap, I would change around the lighting, I would create a new camera, I would render it out, and I would still be spending more time in Nuke than all of the steps before. I was like, it's pretty much done here. I need to just click a button and it's done. And so that was like, okay, I'm just going to do that and just spend a day and put in all the different tricks that I kind of learned, which is like chromatic aberration, halation, grain, vignetting, bloom. Put all of those fun cheat sheets and shortcuts into this one thing so I could just drag sliders. And so that's the thing that I kind of use on all of my shots now. So that's in some of the training that I make now over at unrealforvfx.com. But it's literally the exact template I use, and when I make updates to it, I update it on the site because I already built it. So I'm, if you want it, there it is.
Oh, amazing.
And then the extra layer of special sauce, like I kind of talked about earlier, was the rain or smoke or sparks or explosions and getting real footage of it. Obviously, you can do fluid simulations or explosion simulations inside of Unreal at this point, but if you've seen those,
it never compares. It never compares.
It's just not the right tool for visual effects. Personally, my workflow now is Blender for what I need it for, Unreal for 80% of everything, and then Nuke just to finish things off and add in stock footage and lens effects. And that's it. So it's, it's mostly in Unreal as much as humanly possible. We're inching our way towards hitting that Hollywood visual effects look in a super short amount of time just to show that, hey, it's not just for those of us that have been at studios and learned all these tricks. Like, there's just a couple tricks you got to learn, and anyone can make these big budget movies.
There's plenty of tools out there. You say Unreal Engine, incredible. The marketplace, QUIXEL. I mean, the fact that you can just get photorealistic scans of pretty much everything.
It's crazy. And they keep adding awesome new packs. Like, they're not slowing down at all, which is, like, I thought they would. I really did, but they're totally not.
Yeah, you think maybe it's like a bit of, not a gimmick, but here's 500 free assets, and then that was kind of it. But they really, there's snow packs.
40,000 or something crazy now, and they're useful. And I think a thing that's overlooked, even on the virtual production side of things, it changes per project. But I think it's safe to say, like, 70% of assets typically come from an existing source, and like from packs, from QUIXEL, from commercial sources of some variation. For any folks out there that are looking to get into environments, you want to know how to create assets if you're getting into environments, but you absolutely can build more complex environments with other people's assets as you're getting comfortable. And yeah, just trying to learn one new skill per project, I think, is the best way to approach it. Is not try to learn modeling and speed tree and Gaia and like all these complex things all on one project. Try to build one small scene for each thing, and then once you're ready, you have all the skills now, then pour into that one big portfolio piece at the end, and then you'll kind of blow everyone else's work out of the water. Yeah,
for sure. That's great advice. I was going to say, can you give any advice for people? But I
got another one. Okay,
let's go.
If you're starting out and you're making a film in Unreal, do not use metahumans for your first project. It's crazy complicated if you're just learning Unreal. You graduate into metahumans once you understand characters. I would absolutely recommend that anyone for your first project, if you're making a short film with characters, give them helmets.
If you type in Unreal Engine short film, 80% of them, or at least 3 or 4 years ago, maybe even 90% was There was no faces, of course,
Yeah.
pre-MetaHuman. It was all masks, gas masks, definitely.
Irradiation. It's still, and the thing is, it still works.
And it still works 100%.
So it's a good restriction to have at the beginning. And
Yeah.
then once you're comfortable or you have a team or a budget or whatever, then absolutely go crazy. Or if the whole thing is about one person in a room, it's about the performance, then spend all your time making that performance look awesome. I'm sure someone could. Like, that actually seems what the that MetaHuman animator,
Yeah.
animator, is that the new tool? Where it's more of that motion capture tool. Like, go all in on the facial animation versus that. But I would not try to do that Godzilla short and then also try to do really high detailed facial animation in the same project. Restrictions are a good thing. Sometimes you can be more creative with more restrictions.
Work to your advantage. Work with what you know, what you're comfortable with, and go from there. I think that's a great starting point.
I mean, if anyone's serious about getting into filmmaking, it's not a 1 year and you're done type of path. It's like, we're all at the beginning, for real. Like, we're going to look back in 20 years and be like, dude, do you remember when we were making that stuff? Like, that's really what the goal, at least for me,
Yeah.
is not to like have this flash in the pan success, but like, okay, build the skills. And it's not about like learning the tools, because those will come and go. Like, we know this. It's about like becoming a better artist yourself, because that's what's going to go into the future. It's not Unreal Engine. Like, Unreal, who knows, in 10 years, it might not be a thing anymore. I don't personally think that, because it's super convenient.
Softer Marsh might make a comeback and do something incredible.
Yeah, that's the thing. You just never know. Like, and stuff changes fast. So to me, it's always about focus on the artistic techniques first, because no one can take it away from you, and it applies to 2D, 3D, every medium out there.
Definitely, that's great advice. And usually we do end on advice, Josh, and that's kind of naturally a great ending.
Well, yeah, thanks for inviting me on, y'all. It's super cool to see. I've seen your videos pop up, but I hadn't. I mean, there's just too many videos on YouTube. That's just the biggest problem. Good problem for the world, but no, I watched a couple in the last couple of days here, and it's love your stuff. It's really cool to see.
Thanks, Josh. Really appreciate that. That's really nice to hear.
Awesome, man. Yeah, appreciate it. It was really cool.
Have a good one, Josh. Amazing to meet you.
Absolutely. Take it easy. Take care.